As folks know, I usually like to give the kickoff talk, and this year, this is a reminder of our mission. This year, it's about the rise of private equity. This has been a topic that has come up with a number of you over the last year. It's a topic that came up at the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting this year. It's also a topic that came up at a conference I was at last month, and it came up yesterday. So the truth is, private equity has become a significant part of our economy, and it's worth having some more deeper understanding of that dynamic. As many of you guys may know, I've started 4 companies, and I worked at Kleiner Perkins during kind of the golden of its most golden days. But many of you may not know that prior to starting Tugboat, I was brought into one of the largest private equity firms in the country, if not the world, to help turn around one of their original venture capital fund, which I did successfully over about a 3-year period. So it gave me direct exposure to private equity. But I will say I'm not, and I will not claim I'm an expert in private equity. It's a very large and complicated industry. So I'll do my best to kind of explain my perspectives on it. And for my talk today, I'm going to first talk about some statistics that's driving the growth of private equity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the playbook, and then we'll talk about things we can do in response to that. And I've got 14 points for you. So Doug Tatum, who will be speaking tomorrow, has done extensive research on U.S. American businesses. He's got an incredible database. And his analysis shows that 20% of U.S. businesses are now owned by private equity firms or by the portfolio companies of private equity firms. This is an incredible statistic in my mind. Second, 30 years ago, there was a couple hundred companies owned by private equity firms. Today, it now exceeds 8,000. And that curve does not look like it's slowing down. It far exceeds the number of companies in the public market today. Warren Buffett said this at his annual meeting in May. On Wall Street, is it better to be a salesman or an analyst? Salesman is code by Warren for a private equity owner. He says a salesman. Why? Well, it's the math. If you're a salesman and you can raise $1 billion fund and get your limited partners to pay you 1% average over a 10-year period, these are usually 10-year funds, that's $10 million in annual fees. Over the 10-year period, it's $100 million in guaranteed income. That will be paid to you like a treasury bond will be paid to you. It is guaranteed income. Now, if that fee's 2%, which is fairly common for the larger private equity firms and the ones that have been around for a long time, that's $200 million in guaranteed income. Well, if you're the salesman, you can get rich just off the fees alone of one fund. And you don't have to return any profits to your LPs to earn those fees. Now, if you do return profits, which is hard to do, you'll share in that also. So that's additional upside to those fees. So the byproduct of this is that you'll often hear in the private equity circles, what we really need to do is make sure we raise that next fund, either in our core business or in ancillary businesses where we can convince our LPs we can compete in those areas. But that becomes one of the most important priorities and things on the minds of the owners of private equity firms, not how to build great companies. Warren shares that there's about $1 trillion of dry powder in private equity funds today. With the current leverage being offered to private equity firms, that's about $3 trillion of purchase capacity. So go back to that curve I showed you. Do you think that's slowing down when there's $3 trillion of purchase capacity? So Dan Rasmussen, who I heard speak at a conference, I don't know Dan, but I heard him speak, and I liked many of the points he shared. He said, why do these LPs love private equity? Well, first, they've performed. They've done 14% net of fees over the last 30 years versus 8% for the publics. I'm going to come back to this. Well, they're smart, they're tall, they're handsome, the best looking people at Harvard and Stanford and the business schools, and they're nice. Unlike those mean public analysts who just shred us on those quarterly calls. And he says, it's very hard to judge performance because most of the portfolio companies are still in a private position being valued by friendly valuation firms. So it's hard to know what the real performance is. And frankly, private equity firms are now buying from private equity firms, now buying from private equity firms, all needing to get their money to work to continue to earn those fees and raise the next fund. So there's also a new mantra. It's always good to have a good mantra. We need more time with these portfolio companies to execute strategic change, which makes LPs feel good. You know, strategic change sounds good, sounds positive. We'll give them more money and more time. And this is the part that Dan shared that really surprised me. He said LPs are shifting from fixed income, their allocation of fixed income, to private equity. And it's because PE is now reporting lower volatility than fixed income. And as Dan says, that's got to be a false read on risk. Fixed income, highly liquid, guaranteed income streams versus highly illiquid, highly leveraged portfolio companies, that's less volatile. So the result of this is 94% of limited partners think that private equity will outperform the publics and think they're safer than fixed income. That's why there's $1 trillion of dry powder sitting there. So who else benefits from this ecosystem of transacting in companies? Don't think for a second, a lot of people don't. They do. Investment bankers, law firms, valuation firms, consulting firms, that's Bain and McKinsey, accounting firms, tech consulting firms, executive recruiters. And then after you liquidate your company and you're sitting on all that money, the private wealth management firms are there for you. All these alternative investments are right back at your door saying, give us money so we can go do what we did to you to others. And then luxury good providers, second homes, boats, cars. I mean, all these people benefit greatly from that transacting. And interesting enough, when I was starting Tugboat Institute, I was about a year into it. I won't say which firm or which person, but a very senior person at one of these firms called me up. He had heard I'd been visiting some of his partners, and he said, "What are you doing, Dave? What are you doing?" He said, "The current system works for all of us. You have a good track record. You should go back and raise another venture fund and let this whole idea go." That was motivating for me. So this can feel a bit daunting. Poor little Dorothy with her certified evergreen basket. But fortunately, things like Toto help pull back the curtains, and I want to help pull back the curtains on this. So it's really important to understand that 14%, because that's driving more than anything else here. It is 14% net of fees, but interesting enough, small value publics also did 14%. So you could do just as well investing in the public markets in small value than tying up your money for 10 years in private equity. But here's what's really happening, and Warren Buffett talks about this, Dan talked about this. First, the over-leveraging with today's current easy credit. So they're at a ratio of 60% net debt to enterprise value where the publics are at 10%. You can explain almost the entire difference in performance between leverage. It's just the leverage that they used that isn't being used in the public markets. And this is amazing. In 2018, the average private equity deal was done at 11 times EBITDA, and 6 times of that EBITDA was debt. At that level of EBITDA, that's a CCC rated bond, which has a 30% rate of default. That's pretty scary, and that's why Warren Buffett said there will be bankruptcies in the next downturn of these private equity-backed firms. The other thing they do, and I won't spend much time on it, is they time the calling of their capital to boost their IRRs. There's some funny math around that. But very importantly also, that 14% was driven by 7 times EBITDA as a purchase price. They're now purchasing at 11 times EBITDA. That's substantially higher. Does that mean that prior performances can predict future performance with that kind of multiples and that kind of leverage? But I'm not the one that's been saying this for a decade or two. Warren Buffett's been saying this for a decade or two. Unleveraged returns on common stocks compared to unleveraged return on alternative private equity, common wins, and common wins hands down. And his advice is, instead of investing in private equity, just take your money, borrow money directly, and go ahead and put it in the public markets through something like a total stock market ETF. You're betting on the American economy, you've got a highly liquid security, and you don't have to pay fees and tie up your money. Are the limited partners listening to this? Nope. They haven't before, and they're not doing it now. So until those limited partners smell the coffee, I generally believe this is bad news for our society and for us. 3 trillion, 40%, 94%, in an ecosystem of service providers that are benefiting tremendously from this dynamic of buying and selling companies. It's not going away. So let's peel back this even further. I can't cover the entire PE playbook in a 20-minute presentation, but I'm going to hit a couple highlights for you. A very important one is, how do they convince company owners to sell? And the second is, what do they do after they buy? It's important you understand this. So I call this the angel pitch. We're the experts. We really appreciate what you've done so far, but we're the experts. We have a huge network of company builders, politicians, generals in some cases, banks, service providers, and we're all going to work together to make your business hugely successful. We're going to take it to the next level for you. And we're going to make a commitment to you and your company that you're in very good hands. It's our reputation. We promise you're going to be in very good hands. And now let's talk about you specifically, Mr. Owner. Think of the benefit of diversification you're going to gain when you have that big check sitting in that account for you. You've secured your wealth, you've secured the wealth for your kids, your grandkids, in a highly diversified portfolio. And also, you seem like a charitable guy or gal. Think of all the good charitable work you can do. You can build a building on campus of your alma mater. You can give to your local United Way. You can do all kinds of amazing things. So yeah, go ahead and sell that company. Now, they're feeling a little bit nasty or a little more aggressive. They'll say things like this: man, you're too small. You're just too small. You got to be a part of something much bigger, or you're going to get crushed. That's just the truth. That's what's going to happen to you. I'm sorry. They'll maybe try a different tact, which is, the world's changing. Every industry is being disrupted. We're the experts in strategic transformation. We're the experts in digital transformation. You're not. We are. And then lastly, a very common one is, the world is now about deep pockets. We're a deep-pocketed partner. If you don't have a partner like us, you just can't win. The deep pockets will always win. So that's a tough message. So what do they do after they buy? Well, let's look at Anheuser-Busch, because this is a public case study out of St. Louis. 3G purchased it through the merger of InBev in 2008. And what did they do? Well, they put a hell of a lot of leverage on it. So at the close, I didn't get the actual closing debt to EBITDA ratio, but by the end of the year, they did close the deal. It was 4.7 times. They immediately raised prices on their products, and they immediately started screwing their suppliers. They pushed out from 90 to 180 days. Then they went to zero-based budgeting, forcing the justification of every dollar spent in every department every year. And then they cut corporate headquarters staff, and they replaced some of the most tenured, experienced employees with much cheaper, younger go-getters. They downsized the real estate by 2/3. They moved the headquarters to New York City. They moved to flimsy packaging and other similar things. They moved to a very cheap outsourced IT model. And they cut the philanthropy of the company from 38 million nationwide down to 16 million. And a big part of that nationwide 38 million went to the greater St. Louis area. So it just disappeared. But they did do one thing. I don't think those jeans were the ones they were thinking of, but you could wear jeans to work after that. That was really sweet of them. And then as a comparative, I couldn't find this for Anheuser-Busch, but In-N-Out, which I talked about last year, which is considered an evergreen company, they pay their average manager $83,000 a year. Burger King pays, and that's a 3G-owned company, $38,000 a year. So you start seeing where the deltas are between the evergreen companies and these private equity companies. I think it's important to note that. The other thing they like to do is roll-ups. And a roll-up is you find a highly fragmented market. You go find what they call a hired gun. This is a professional CEO that's been around, who's actually done acquisitions before and operated a company at scale. You go buy a platform company, and you don't worry about how much you pay for that, because you're going to make it up in other ways. And then you start rolling up smaller regional players and mom-and-pop players for a much lower price. And what it really is a purchase arbitrage game between the smaller and the larger. And eventually they'll sell this, say, 10 to 11 times EBITDA, but they bought most of the companies for an average 3 to 4 times EBITDA. And they do cost reduction, just like you do at Anheuser-Busch, and then some very specific things that are part of the roll-up playbook, which is you remove the owner-operator completely, or you turn them into an employee with no authority. You negotiate significant purchase discounts from your suppliers. You rip everything out regarding the technology and put your own technology in. You change all the work processes and force the employees to adhere to those work processes, even if in the local region they require different work processes. You rebrand all the operations under a single brand. You purchase regional and national ads. You standardize pay at a lower level. And this is kind of how you run the roll-up playbook. And then you sell it, and most likely to another private equity firm at this point. So what does going to the next level feel like? Remember that point, I'm going to take your business to the next level. Well, here's a former executive of a PE-backed firm, and he described what the next level felt like to him. And I'm going to read this because I think it's important. The interference was significant by PE. When PE first came into the business, we justified them due to their bringing to bear needed structure, good governance, a real board. You can see that. But everything beyond that was too much. Too many reports had to be generated for the PE firm, and way too much time was spent explaining monthly all the numbers to the PE firm. This took focus away from running the business. This is where it gets really interesting. You and management start caring more about what the board members think than what customers and employees think. And when this happens, the company's in trouble. We would blame the weather, or we'd blame other things for why the offices were underperforming to their plan. Remember, it's the PE plan. After a while, you start believing your own lies to the board. It's self-preservation under the constant pressure. It's always someone else's fault. Towards the end, we were not doing the hard work of focusing on the business as a people business, but instead focusing on the business as spreadsheets, reports, and explanations. So, what can you do about this? I have 14 ideas for you. So first, it has to start with your mindset. Do not let private equity track you into a lower game. Being an evergreen company is incredibly important to our society, and the fact that your company has a deep purpose matters a lot, and it may matter a lot more than you even realize. You might recognize this is George Bailey on the left. It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of those movies I still tear up when I watch. But it took Clarence, that angel, to convince George that if he had never lived, that community would have been much less for it. And I think something similar analogy for evergreen companies if they sell their businesses. You may not appreciate what that does to their communities after you're gone. You've got the playbook. The Evergreen 7 Ps provide a very powerful framework for thinking about how to be around for the long haul. You're in really good company. All of you are evergreen companies, and that company is enough. Only reason I put this up here is because these are national brands that most people know, and some of these are members of our institute. Edward Jones, Radio Flyer, SRC. And I think others of these will end up joining us over time too. But it's just to highlight there's some really good, very successful businesses that are evergreen companies too. Interesting enough, 84% of Fortune 500 CEOs wish they could be running a private company. I don't think they are thinking a private equity-backed private company. I think they're thinking an evergreen company. And then you have to think again, at a high level, how much do I really need? How much do I need in my bank account to sleep well at night? And this is a utility curve, which basically says that as you generate some wealth, the utility, the happiness you're generating off that goes up very rapidly. And so there is a point where, yes, some wealth does create comfort. You sleep well at night, you've paid off your mortgage, you're taking care of your kids' college education. But how much do you really need? Do you really need to take $100 million that's being waved in front of you or more? Second, remember, these are the best salesmen in the world. And the people on their staffs are being trained to be the best salesmen in the world. So anything you tell them may be used against you in the future, directly or indirectly. You can be your own disciplined business leader. You don't need private equity to keep you accountable and improve your business. If you've got fat, cut it yourself. Be disciplined. Improve your cash cycle. Understand lean and Kaizen. Understand great game of business to cut waste, increase efficiency, and empower your employees. Improve your own information systems. Automate your own routine processes. Think about where you might have opportunities in digital transformation. Consider regular price increases yourself. If you're delivering value, you should be doing that. Experiment with new business models. And then you can use the increased cash that you generate to reinvest in your business or share it with your employees and or your owners. They have to use that cash to finance that over leverage. That's where all that extra cash is going, to pay that 6 times EBITDA down as quickly as they can. You can put in place a highly functioning fiduciary board or advisory board. They don't have to do that for you. You can recruit, retain, and develop better talent. you've got an incredible purpose. It starts there. You can compensate your people better than they can. Because again, they're financing debt payments. You're not. You're reinvesting in your people and your business. You can treat your loyal, long-term, tenured employees very well, but you have to keep them accountable for still performing. And you don't have to do anything knee-jerk like letting people go because you're going to miss the quarter. Point 6, if you haven't considered in the past, consider M&A. It's hard to get good at M&A, but you have to start somewhere, and you're going to make mistakes. Tom shared that last year in his presentation. And this is unique to being an evergreen company. You can compete on speed, flexibility, and adaptability in a way that private equity firms cannot and public firms cannot. And scale today is not the determinant of success in the future. Don't buy into that story. You have to be big to win. If that was true, Kraft would be doing a lot better. Anheuser-Busch would be doing a lot better. Campbell Soups would be doing a lot better than they're doing. Nimble new entrants are taking share. Remain relevant to your customers and suppliers. I mean, this is super important. If your customers and suppliers are happy, you're really not vulnerable. And if they're working with you, they're telling you where they need you to go with them, and you're listening, you're going to do quite well. And make a selling point of your evergreen values, including when you're pitching and competing. We're not going anywhere. We're not going to be sold. I can be your long-term partner. We'll be here for you. Get really good at innovating, because to be around 100 years from now, as you know, you got to innovate well. And here's 5 ideas from your peers here in this audience. Constraints drive creativity, not excess cash. Constraints actually make you more creative. Low-cost experiments dig a lot of holes. Robert Passon talked about this, Jim Goodnight. You don't know where the next opportunity is going to be, so try lots of things in a low-cost way. Protect the new ideas, that baby that's maybe not so pretty, from the beast, which is the established business that's really gotten good. Go on evergreen learning journeys with your team, and don't rush the learning process. Give your chance to do this over 6 months, a year, and learn together. Pursue, if you want, and this is Clayton Christensen's challenge for us, the Harvard professor, pursue industry-creating, empowering innovations. The model of Evergreen is perfectly suited for that kind of pursuit, where you go to profitability early and growth second, and often pursuing a small market before you go into a large market. And then compete on longer time frames. The public company, arguably, quarterly, right? But if it's not going well, you know this splits to half quarters, right? By middle of the quarter, they're already in panic mode if your public company is not going to meet its numbers. The private equity-backed company will say publicly, we've got a 3 to 4 year time frame. They've got a 30-day time frame. You heard the quote. You guys have a 10-year time frame, 5-year time frame, 20-year time frame, whatever time frame you and the other owners choose to pick with your management team. And very importantly, this is Jeff Bezos, and a CEO I admire, and I think many of you do. In order for innovative ideas to bear fruit, you need to be willing to wait 5 to 7 years, and most companies don't have that time horizon. Evergreen companies absolutely can operate in that time horizon if they choose to. The other two can't. Just by definition, they're not going to be allowed to. So what else can you do about it? Don't chase growth for growth's sake. You don't have to have these stylized up and to the right curves of private equity, venture capital, and public firms. Grow as your markets open up for you. Grow as your financial resources allow, and very importantly, grow as your human talent and culture allow you to grow. And typically, the third ends up being the most important over time. Determine it. Colleen Wegman, in a very interesting conversation at Edward Jones, said, we tried growing at 3 stores per year and realized, no, we're better at 2. So we just do 2 stores per year, year after year, and we do that really well. That's a $9 billion company. Focus on long-term economic profit, not revenue growth. That's where real value is created, and you can hear more about that from a couple of our speakers tomorrow. And really allow time to work to your benefit and compound that paced growth. And just as a highlight reminder, this hypothetical company doing $3 million of EBITDA, growing at 15% a year, is now doing $5 million of EBITDA. By venture and private equity standards, that's a failure. You're not doing very well. You're living dead almost. So arguably, you could go raise some money, sell the majority of your company, probably lose money at first and get to a higher growth rate, and then sell it before it gets bad. And let's say you sell it for 150, the founder made 50 million, the private equity firm made 100 million, and everybody celebrates the great exit, but the dream's over, the business is done, your values are probably ended. But if we extend the time frame, that's that little private equity experiment, over 30 years, and continue growing at 15% a year, you will build a monster company. That company will be doing over $200 million of EBITDA. The dream lives on, your values live on, the team stays intact, and you've got tremendous resources to do good in the community, to do good within your business, and to reward both your employees and your owners. What else can you do? I'm getting down to the end here. You can get ready for the next downturn. The private equity-backed firms are going to have a hell of a time in that next downturn. If you've got low debt and your team is ready, you're going to have some tremendous opportunities. As Warren Buffett said, many will go bankrupt. And as Jack Stack said, many will be bought for pennies on the dollar from the banks if you're prepared to do so. The other thing you can do, and this is Jim Goodnight, be prepared to keep your team intact. Try hard to do that. Keep your culture intact. Ask everybody to participate in saving money and to be more creative than ever and really launch your company forward as everybody else is worrying about whether they're going to have a job the next day. And then think about benchmarking yourself against other evergreen businesses. And do that not just individually as a team. What can we learn? How we can improve? There's lots of great knowledge within this group alone. And then the last two are really about something I have not appreciated enough and came very clear to me when one of our members just lost his company a couple of months ago. And I'm not going to tell the story. Someday he will tell the story, but somebody we all admire. If you ignore communication issues and dynamics within your ownership base and within your management team, bad things will happen someday. You've got to reinforce that your purpose is greater than anyone's wealth or dividend. You've got to encourage people to take longer time horizons to the current issues you're facing and the offer that's being waved in front of you by a private equity firm. And you have to have a clear management succession plan in place at all times. And secondly, you have to prepare for ownership transition early. Someday you will transition ownership if you're the owner of the business. You will by definition because you will not live forever. But if you have a predetermined liquidity option at an acceptable, not necessarily market price, to get the non-believers out, that is one of the best ways you can inoculate yourself from inadvertently losing your company over a short amount of time. And this is a deeper, richer subject we should talk about at some point, but it is something that's really important in being able to be an evergreen company for the long haul. So the good news is you don't have to lower yourself to their game or fear it. You don't. Evergreen companies are very well positioned. You can do all of the positive things that that private equity firm offers to take your business to the next level in a good way. And plus you can do other things they can't do as an evergreen company to compete effectively with them. Thank you.